Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 45-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Cathy, a 53-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum, and change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present.
Hey, how you going?
I'm so well. I'm so excited for today's guest. Do tell who's on.
We have Sophie Scott. She is just incredible. Sophie Scott, for anyone they might remember Sophie from ABC television. She was a health journalist on ABC. Sophie has over 20 years of medical journalism with the ABC. She is also an international speaker, educator, and she has expertise in mental health and wellbeing. She received an Order of Australia Medal for her service to broadcast media and to community health. She has written 3 books. Her latest is Beat High Functioning Anxiety Now. She's also written Live a Longer Life and Road Testing Happiness. She's won major awards for her journalism and medical reporting. She was also a voice of calm that we all had throughout the pandemic on the ABC. When she left the ABC, she was invited to give a TEDx talk on surviving and thriving burnout. She's an adjunct associate professor at Notre Dame University Medical School, lecturing in science communication. She's an ambassador for Bowel Cancer Australia and Pain Australia, and is a patient reviewer for the British Medical Journal.
Wowzers.
I know.
Can't wait to talk to her.
So incredible. Hi, Sophie. How are you?
I'm good, Cathy. It's so nice to talk to you after being Instagram friends for so long.
No, we have, and it's been lovely. And Laura, if you don't already follow Sophie, she shares the most incredible.
I'm so there.
Just lots of little inspirational things every day. There's something new around burnout, anxiety, all sorts of different mental health topics that really resonate with me. So that's why we thought we would have you on, and you just make such a beautiful guest for all of our listeners.
And so recognizable. I told my husband Jules that we were going to be talking to you, and he was like, "Oh, celebrity." I was like, "Yes, I know."
Well, he would know, Sophie, because he's a doctor.
So I was very familiar with your work with the ABC. So yes,
thank you. Yes, no, look, it's interesting having had one career and then doing something different, and it's nice to know that people still recognise you from the old work that you did, and I did that job at ABC for almost 25 years, so it was really I definitely enjoyed it, but I think it's also good to know when it's time to use your skills in another way and get to the point where you feel comfortable with making those changes in life.
Yeah, so amazing. And you've got such a huge back catalogue of impressive work. And actually, I wanted to kick off by asking about your career because it has been so incredible. Do you have any kind of particular career highlights that you could share to kick us off? But also, I was really interested, as you were the medical reporter for our national broadcaster during the global pandemic. I mean, what was that like?
Well, let me start with the pandemic, then I can go back to the career. So the interesting thing about a pandemic, I covered health for ABC for, more than 20 years, and I'd done a lot of stories about previous infectious diseases, so swine flu and bird flu, and I knew all the experts were saying we were overdue for a pandemic, but you never actually really think it's going to happen, until it does happen. So, I guess on a cognitive level and a scientific and a data level, there was definitely all the indicators were there that it was going to happen. But, everyone just goes along living their lives and being busy and focusing on the little things in front of them. And you never, I don't think, apart from the infectious diseases experts whose whose, mission it is to remind us about these things, who are, planning for the next one and thinking about the next one already, we were quite lucky in Australia in some ways because we had successive federal governments who had actually been preparing for this sort of behind the scenes. So in a lot of ways, we were in a good position in terms of the national stockpile that had been set up. And so I knew about all those sort of things, but it's very different to know about it and have experts talk about it. It's very different when it actually happens. And when it actually broke, I was actually in the United States at the start of 2020 on a leadership tour. And so I could see this massive story breaking, and I'm sitting in a hotel room in California going, I need to get back to Australia and cover this and find out what the hell is going on. And, I knew it was going to, at that point it hadn't reached Australia, but I knew it would. And I wanted to get home and be back home and get my head around it and start explaining it to the Australian audiences what was going on. And one of the things that really helped me cover the pandemic in a way that I was really happy we could cover for our audiences was that I had very good contacts in the infectious diseases area because of my previous things I'd done with swine flu and bird flu and SARS as well. And I also had really good contacts overseas, mainly through social media, but particularly in the UK and some in the US, but I had a lot of really good contacts in the UK. And so as a result of that, I could really see what was happening over there and realise that we were going to have the same thing happen to us in Australia, sometimes a couple of days later, sometimes a couple of weeks later. And so it was a really good way of just staying a bit ahead of the game rather than waiting for things to happen and then go, oh, my goodness, how are we going to cope? I could see what the doctors were posting. I could see what they were writing about and what they were worried about. And that gave me a really good indication that we needed to be thinking about this. And so it was really good, for all the bad things about social media, and there's certainly a lot of things that are not great, having those international contacts, being able to see what they were thinking and feeling and doing in real time made it much better for me to get an indicator of how we needed to cover the pandemic here. And it was also interesting from a health communication and science point of view to have everything changing so quickly, because that's not the way health and science generally works. No. Normally you have something and you might have small incremental changes to our knowledge about something, but the basics remain the same in terms of our understanding of how something might work in health and science. But with COVID, there was so much research. It was happening every day, and there were new learnings and understandings, and we were having to throw out what we thought and sort of rewrite the rule book, each week. And so that was also a challenge as well. But I had some really fantastic experts in Australia who I relied on quite a lot to sort of guide me through all this masses of research that was coming out, and to sort of be able to look at it and say, this is what really is important. This is what we need to focus on. One of the other biggest things that I just thinking about it is that we were very much, for the first time, we asked the audience, what do you want to know? In journalism, and I know you've both worked in the media in different ways. We tend to just sort of do stories about what we think people want to know about. For the first time, ABC went to the audience and said, what do you really want to know? What do you need to know? And this will drive what we do. And so that was really empowering in a lot of ways, because you knew that you were doing stories that people really wanted to watch and really wanted to read, rather than just what I thought they might want to know.
Yeah, so comforting. I loved watching the ABC during the way. Remember the background was different. We had all the spiky.
Yeah, we had all this special
stuff.
Special sets. We had special imagery and graphics, and we had special TV shows. We had a show called The Virus, and then it was changed to be The Vaccine, and so we had a lot, and we had new podcasts that started up, and we were really, a lot changed in terms of how we delivered our content to audiences throughout that period, and we were developing a lot of it on the go, and iterating it on the go. We were doing a lot of live Q&As where we'd get experts on and answer the audience's questions in real time, and we'd never done anything like that before.
Incredible.
So it was a really interesting, experience to be part of, and it was pretty full on. You know, I was really lucky in some respects because when we all had to start working from home, my husband has a production company, so we had the lights and TV cameras and microphones and everything. So it was very easy for me to pivot to working from home, and in some ways it was good. So I could just have my little dog on my lap and do all my work and you know, work pretty long hours, really long hours. But yeah, no, it wasn't. I wouldn't think that we ever want to really go through that experience again. But I think if you can look back and say, what did we get from that we can really lean into, and the lessons. And I think one of the biggest lessons is just how important it is to have that connection with people, particularly in real life when we couldn't really go and see people and you were feeling more isolated. So I think there were some lessons that we're still processing from it.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's not that long ago.
I know. I work in public information in, you know, my day job, which is slightly different to health, but health had to pivot very quickly to doing emergency public information. And a lot of public information requires behaviour change, and asking people to change behaviour without really explaining why they need to, saying it's for the collective common good, usually doesn't actually wash very well with people. And health had to really get across that and learn that for people to make ongoing behaviour change that is important behaviour change, and whether that is about health, whether that is about weather, you know, bushfires, storms, whatever it might be, cybersecurity, any of those things, we need to make that connection with our audience to get them to understand why it's important for them. We understand when we're getting a message out, when you're, you know, giving important information out about, you know, health in the pandemic, that it is really for the collective common good. But humans are pretty individualistic, and if we can't see why it's important for us,
what's in it for us, you know, you're exactly right, Cathy. Like, there's a concept in psychology called the spotlight effect, and what that refers to is that most of the time people are just thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about you. They're not thinking about anyone else other than themselves and what they're going to have, you know, what they might be going to have for lunch or for dinner. And they're very sort of self-focused. And I think that's something that is really important to bear in mind when you're thinking about how do you get people to change their behaviour. And one of the main ways to do it is to think what's in it for the individual. Because even though, Australians are quite altruistic, and probably, you know, when I looked at the research in terms of why did Australians largely comply with a lot of the things that were brought in during COVID, and a lot of the researchers came up, you know, believed it was because we are probably more likely to do things for the common good other than other countries. So that was a big tick in our favour. But ultimately, people do really think about what's in it for me in terms of, if I'm going to make this change, how am I going to benefit? So being able to appeal to that is something that I think helps get those messages across. And it's also, I think, you know, whenever because I'm really interested in behaviour change and habits, and I love reading about the science of habits, and I've thought about how to change my own habits and what actually works and makes a difference. And it is true, you really need to think about what are the immediate benefits, because if it's too long off in the distance, our brains are so focused on the immediate, you know, what's happening around us right now, that we can't really think, oh, I'm going to do this now and it'll benefit me in 6 months or 12 months, whatever. If you can just think about whatever you're doing today is going to just help you. And then, you know, I talk about, like, you know, what we do today is a gift for your future self, but that future self can be just tomorrow. It doesn't have to be 6 months from now. It can actually just be how you're going to feel tomorrow. So if you go to bed at a reasonable time and have a good nighttime routine, it'll actually help you be able to get up in the morning and do the things that you might want to do. Whereas if you have that bedtime procrastination and stay up really late, then you probably won't want to get up in the morning. I am really fascinated with how we can motivate ourselves, or how we can embed those behavior changes so that we don't have to rely on motivation, and we can just go, okay, these are my rules to live by, and this is what I do.
Can I just quickly jump in as well and say, I remember I did an interview with Dr. Norman Swan, it was about 2021, I suppose. It was right in the thick of that second lockdown. And I remember asking him about trolls. And, there was a lot of, even though, as you say, Australians were overall incredibly good at taking on the vaccine or the public health information at the time. Did you experience any sort of nastiness online? And if so, how did you kind of deal with that at the time?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think what I found during COVID was a degree of polarization on social media that I had never experienced before. So I had seen some of my colleagues get a lot of abuse on Twitter and a lot of trolling and things like that. And I had largely been spared from that for whatever reason. But that wasn't the case with COVID. So, while I had to stay having a social media presence to make those contacts and to keep across what everyone else was doing, you definitely did find that you were under a lot more scrutiny, and a lot of people would, my thing was, if anyone had complaints or, I would just block people straight away and not engage. I wasn't there to change people's minds. I'm just there to put out information and facts, and I'm not there to get into debates with people. And so I was relatively lucky that I didn't get too much of it, but I could see a lot of people getting a lot of trolling, and a lot of women, particularly online, and female journalists do get a lot of dreadful comments, and it's just really not acceptable. And for them, I can understand why they wouldn't want to have a presence on some platforms, because it's just your well-being is worth more than having to deal with that sort of stuff. So it did get to one point actually that I was finding that a lot of people were constantly just commenting on my posts and things like that, particularly on Twitter. And so then I just sort of stepped away for a while, and I've only just started actually posting on Twitter again. But I much prefer other platforms. I really prefer Instagram, much prefer LinkedIn, much prefer posting videos on YouTube. And I think generally you're going to find a more respectful audiences on those different platforms.
I agree. Yeah.
So it sort of comes with the territory, but I don't think you should have to put up with that trolling just because you're trying to put information out there. And, it's interesting. It was a challenging period to be putting out as a health communicator, really challenging. And I think you would find anyone who was doing what I was doing or working in public health would say the same. It was really challenging because it became very politicized, and people didn't really want to hear the facts. They just had their own views, and they didn't really care about facts. And so you can't, if someone's like that, you can't argue with them because they've already got their mind made up. And so that is very challenging in some respects. And so I'm quite glad and that was one of the reasons I think, I changed my Instagram at the start of 2020 when the pandemic, that's when I started to focus more on putting out all the mental wellbeing stuff on Instagram. And it was really to balance out the negativity and the trolling and the other side of things. So I really just started doing it for a couple of reasons. I knew that I really wanted to be doing more in that space anyway. And so I thought if I'm thinking about this, I may as well be putting it out there, because if it's going to be of interest to me and help to me, hopefully it'll be of help to someone else. And so I found that was a sort of a bit of an antidote to the negativity and the sort of trolling and things, really focusing on putting out sort of positive and uplifting and still evidence-based content to do with mental well-being was a way that I could sort of, step away from thinking about all the COVID stuff and think about, okay, what can I put out that's going to be helpful to people when they really need some some tools to manage their emotional well-being.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that and continuing to do that, because it's so needed.
I really enjoy doing it, and I just think it's the way our brains are wired. We're wired to sort of focus on the negative because we're always looking out for, to try to see whether our environment is safe, and the way our nervous system works, we're always looking out for danger. So we have to actively work against that. We have to actively challenge that through your thoughts and through your habits. Otherwise, if you don't, then the brain will just naturally focus on what's going wrong. And so you have to actually actively work to switch that around. It's a bit like, if you read a review of something and it's all positive and then there's one negative line, and the one negative line will stick with you rather than all the positive things that someone might have said. If they write one negative thing, the way the brain works, you'll just remember that one negative thing. And so it's just, I find it helpful to have those constant reminders of that, and that we need to be actively sort of focusing on, habits and activities that create those positive emotions so that you're counteracting the negativity that just comes with being a human being.
Yeah. Sure. And that's for me when I'm engaging with, and I typically look for your content most days because it's a good reminder for me every day, just to not get stuck in my negative self-talk, or whether it might be just reminding myself to stop and take a break, or that I don't have to be perfect today. Done is okay. And all of the just bite-sized reminders that you put out, they have been such a godsend to me on days, on so many days. So, yeah.
And I just think, we're all trying to do our best, and we're all, busy and have lots of responsibilities, as midlife women. And sometimes it can just be, particularly if you're on social media and you're looking at other people's lives thinking, oh, they've got it all together. But the reality is they're probably just feeling the same as you and me and all of us. So I think it's good to just have those reality checks and to think about, focusing on building in rituals in your day that are going to really serve you. And that's the thing that really helped me is actually thinking about building in habits that are so automatic that you don't actually need to rely on motivation, but you just think, okay, as soon as I wake up, for me, it's like make a cup of tea and do some quick meditation. 10 minutes, it's the first thing I do, first 10 minutes of the day. So it's just done and you don't have to think about it, rather than having big grand plans to do a whole lot. But the more you can sort of ritualize things and embed, because so much of our behavior is automatic. It's a bit like jumping in the car and driving somewhere that you know the way really well. You don't need to think about which way you need to turn, and you just do it. And so that's what we want to do with these habits that are going to help, nurture you and boost your mental health and well-being. You want them to be as automatic as possible. Absolutely. And so you don't have to rely on motivation.
Yeah, so true. And before we move on, talk more about some great tips that you've obviously got so many of. Is there any career highlights you wanted to quickly mention in there?
Yeah, so look, I guess one of the biggest things that I really enjoyed was doing stories that involved spending time with patients. And a lot of the stories that I did, particularly the investigative stories I did to do with cosmetic surgery and to do with the pelvic mesh, the women who had that dreadful pelvic mesh embedded and had all the problems. So I got to know a lot of them very well. And the biggest thing was seeing when someone trusts you to tell their story, then you can see as a result of them sharing their powerful stories, we were able to see changes and improvements to public health and to patient safety. And so that was a really rewarding outcome for me and the producers that I worked with, because I wasn't just doing it on my own. I was working with amazing producers. And so having the opportunity to be able to tell someone's story and have those stories lead to improvements and know that now things are better and safer for patients, and other patients won't need to go through what these mainly women went for cosmetic surgery and for the pelvic mesh, that other women won't have to go through that as a result, is something that I think, even though the pace of change can be very slow, but overall we did some really good stories that did result in some really significant changes. And so that's something that I look back on. I think I'm really glad we stuck with those stories and we kept doing them until we got some change.
Yeah.
Important work.
We know that you also kind of had a bit of a career shift, and you're now no longer on our screens as much because you've been quite public with your burnout. And so can you tell us a little bit how you got to there and what, like where you are now,
Yeah, so it's really interesting because what happened with me and burnout, it actually happened before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just before the pandemic, and I'd been really busy. I'd been doing a lot of these big investigations, which meant really long hours. And as well as that, I was also doing other things like flying around the country and hosting health events and forums and things like that. So I sort of had 2 jobs, and I've got 4 sons. And so it was a really busy, full on, I loved it. It was great. But I was one of those people that I found it very hard to switch off mentally. So even on the weekends, I'd be always looking and thinking about, story ideas and what I'm going to be doing and just never really getting out of that sort of high cortisol fight or flight on the go, and never really getting into that ability to really rest and relax and recharge. And I think you can do that for a while, and I did it for a long time. And I loved it. I loved being in a newsroom, and I loved the adrenaline of that. But I think after a certain point, your body starts to sort of, and for me, it was definitely a physical thing. Cognitively, I was yeah, I'm fine and everything's fine. But physically, my body was I just can't keep this pace up anymore. It's just enough is enough. And that's what happens with burnout. You get to this physical exhaustion stage where you just physically can't do what you had been doing. And then you feel very disillusioned and there's, you think that, you feel quite disengaged and there must be something wrong with you and how come everyone else is coping. And then you start to feel like you're not doing your job as well as you could, or you're not making that difference that you want to make. And so it was interesting because this happened just before the pandemic, and a psychiatrist friend of mine rang up and said he was writing a book about burnout, and he went through the list of symptoms, and I'd just been going through all these health issues as well. And when he read out the list, I was just like, oh my God, that's exactly what I've got. So
gosh,
that was the red flag to me, plus the sort of things that have been going on with my health, to go to the doctor and just sort of say, what's happening. And then it was just about building my nervous system back up to a point where I was able to function well, and then, still work all through the pandemic and everything. But I had to maintain, the things that I'd put into place, like those practices that were going to help me get out of that fight or flight, not being, and a lot of it was really challenging when you're working really long hours. But I also needed to think about, asking the tough questions as well, thinking what was there anything that I have done that might have contributed to this as well? And thinking about, I like being productive and I like being busy and I like doing stuff, but equally, if you think about elite athletes who are at the top of their game, they build in those rest and recovery periods so that they can be high performers. And so what I've realized now is that to not do that means that you can't be a high performer and be sustainable without building in that rest and recovery, without that switching off, without, having the other side of the spectrum. If you just go the whole time, you're just going to end up crashing and burning. And also realizing that burnout, it's really not a personal failing in any way. It's really just a sign of the mismatch between, often it's really big workloads and people don't get the support that they need, particularly people working in healthcare. so there could be a number of reasons why people get to the burnout phase, but, it's not any reflection on your own abilities. Even though when you're in that burnout phase, a lot of people feel very isolated and like there's something, why aren't they coping better than everybody else? But when you scratch the surface, you probably find if one person in a workplace is feeling burnt out, then probably a lot of them are, and it's often the people that have been the most high performing and the hardest workers, because people who are very passionate about their work often find it hard to put in those boundaries and do that switching off that's really important and really necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you make some great points there. And the rest period that we think about seasons in a year, and Cathy and I were talking about this yesterday, how winter is essential. Everyone needs their kind of that time to just hibernate, stop a bit, like however that plays out for you in life. And
we were also talking, I'm just
go
on you, Laura. We were talking about Laura's in a season of her life where she has an opportunity to take a sabbatical. She's finished one contract and sort of she's got some holidays, and so it's a tricky time for her being in between jobs. And we were talking about how you don't get that opportunity often to take that time to really reflect on what you want in life and what your values are and where you want to be moving, where you want your career to go and what you want, those sorts of things. And we're sort of conditioned to believe that we have to hustle all the time. We have to be doing. If we're not doing, then we're not productive. And I was really trying to encourage Laura and challenge Laura that it's okay to take this time to enjoy this sabbatical that she
and I think someone that I know, a very close friend of mine, went through a similar experience where she's someone that sort of works at a really high CEO level, and she wanted to leave one job and didn't necessarily have another one lined up that she wanted to jump into, but she really took that as a sabbatical time to really just focus on herself and think about what she wanted to do next, and ended up, it was actually a fantastic period for her to have that time. And she's someone who's like 100%, a million miles an hour. So she was the last person you would have thought would have ever taken a sabbatical. But she really saw it as quite a strategic move, as a way of like stepping back a little bit, thinking about what do I really want my next move to be, rather than just jumping into whatever the next thing that just came along. And it was a fantastic thing that she did, and she ended up, the next role has been a huge success, and she's loving it. So
good.
I think if we ever get those opportunities, it's a really good time to sort of step back and think about, what do I see as my purpose, and how can I use my skills to the best of my abilities in a way that lights you up the most. Because that's the thing, like, you've got to think about the work that we do. We can put our efforts in all different directions, but what are the things that are going to really, at the end of the day, you're going to think, you're good at it, but also you get a lot from it as well, that you feel at the end of the day that was really worthwhile. Like, that was a worthwhile use of my time and energy, as well as something that you're really good at as well.
I think, that's so true, and something I'm definitely thinking about. So thank you. Good to know that your very high achieving friend has come back strong. Because interesting, I was watching your YouTube last night, and I was watching the one about productivity guilt, and thinking, that's me, because I get so guilty. You feel guilty, especially I think in midlife too, right? Because I feel panicky. Oh, that's it. No one's going to employ me. I'm too old. Digital media is such a youthful environment as well. And coming from
you're not too old,
no, but coming from Mamma Mia and places that are quite youth based, it does concern me a little. But I also think I just need that time, actually. So yes, I'm going to.
But I also think leaning into finding people who are going through the same sort of things that you're going through, finding that sense of community. And for a lot of people, that's how I met Cathy online, and and Cathy and I haven't met in real life yet, but we will, I'm sure. We will catch up in real life.
We keep planning to. I think I think the pandemic really got in the way of that. But yeah.
And I think, one of the things that helped me feel comfortable about making the decision to leave like a high-profile broadcasting job was because I looked at and I sort of leaned into the feedback that I was getting from people about, what they were, when I would even go out and do stories or I'd be seeing people, and everybody would always be talking about how much they were enjoying the stuff I was putting out on LinkedIn or social or Instagram and so I thought, you know what, that's where the audiences are, and the same with you with the podcast. This is where people want to come to listen to an interesting conversation that they can get something out of and apply to their own life. And so I think if you can find those pockets where you can, find that sense of community with like-minded people, and that's something that you can find it in real life. You can definitely, and that's one thing I've prioritized since I've had more time. I've really lent into some, I've made a new friend in the last 12 months who I am super close to now, and to the point of people think we've known each other for like our whole lives. We only met last year.
Oh, good.
So, I think this is actually a really great time of life when you can do that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
To think about that some of the people that you might end up being the closest to, you may not have even met yet.
Love that thought. You can't have too many friends, really, people that people are so infinitely interesting, and I think that's the thing. Cathy and I have talked about that before. The older we get, the more interesting we get. So, Sophie, do you have any other sort of quick tips maybe especially for women in midlife around coping with, burnout, stress generally?
Yeah, so look, the biggest thing for me is, we've talked about daily actions, we've talked about habits, building in the breaks to your day. When I go into workplaces now and I talk to teams about how to perform at a high level without burning out, I show them the neuroscience about how your brain can only work for about 90 minutes at a time, and then you need to have a break. And if you don't take that break, what happens is your concentration goes down. You might be more likely to make more mistakes. And so building in just like a little reset after every 90 minutes, and people find that fascinating when they're like, oh, wow, it's why you can't just sit there and work for 3 hours at a time. It's not designed, the brain's not designed that way. So understanding that, building in those breaks for your cognition and your mental well-being, even if it's only 5 minutes, you just need to have that little reset. And then also the other thing that I think about too is, and this is something that, given we all sort of have worked and are working in the media, is that the urgency, what I call the urgency fallacy, where we think everything has to be done right now, straight away, at this minute. If someone sends you a text, you're like, oh, I've got to get back to them, or I've sent an email, they've got to respond straight away. And what I've realized outside the media environment is that's, most people are really surprised when I write back to them the same day. They're like, oh, thanks for responding so quickly. Whereas in the media, that would be like, if you don't respond within 30 seconds, people are like, what's wrong? Why didn't you email me back?
What happened? Is there a bigger emergency?
Exactly. And so that sense of urgency and that sense of you've got to respond to everything straight away, it just sets you up in that fight or flight to be constantly looking out for danger. And so being able to just go, you know what, not everything has to be dealt with at the moment. And because if we feel like everything's urgent and everything's super important, then it really means that nothing's urgent and nothing's super important. So being able to actually categorize what are the things that actually really need to be dealt with urgently, and what can I put down my list. And, there's a little phrase I call, you can think about your to-do list and then whether there are things you can ditch. I think I've done a YouTube on it. It's ditch, delegate, and delay. So ditch is really like, what can I take off my agenda? What can I just go, you know what, I'm not going to do that right now. Delegate is thinking about, is it something that you really need to do, or could somebody else do it? We don't have to do everything. And then delay is one probably my favorite, which is like, it doesn't need to be done today. Ideally, I need to get it done by the end of the week or the end of the month, and then just sort of put it off until it actually has to be done. And that can reduce your sense of overwhelm when you realize not everything has to be done at this very moment, not everything's urgent. And just thinking about, if there was only one thing that you could get done today, what would that thing be? And just focus on there. Like pick that big thing first. And ideally, it's another theory. It's called the big rocks theory, where you think about what's the most important to either, move you forward on a project or move you forward in your, whatever it is in your health journey, what's going to make the biggest impact, and pick that thing first and then start from there. So just start with one thing first, and then you'll find other things will follow after that.
Love that. Yeah.
Such great advice, as always, Sophie.
Oh, thank you.
Full of the good advice and practical as well. And not overwhelming. And that's what I really, that's what resonated with me in like all those years ago when I started following you, was that it was easily incorporated into my day, because it is just bite-sized little chunks of information that I can go, all right, I can do 5 minutes of meditation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not great at quieting the mind and all the rest of it, but I can do 5 minutes. And then some days I find, 5 minutes is not quite enough. I actually want a little bit longer. And so then I'll do another 5 minutes, That's not often, because
but that's good though. But that's amazing, because building those habits, it's like building a muscle, and it's like the more you just do it, the more automatic it becomes. And I always sort of think to myself and say, what can you do on your worst day? Like on the day when you're feeling crappy or you're feeling tired or you're busy, whatever you can do on your worst day, start there. That's where you need to start. So if it's 5 minutes, then just start with 5 minutes. But that's having that consistency and, thinking about what can you do, every single day ideally, so that it becomes an automatic behavior and you don't have to rely on motivation and you don't have to rely on feeling good or feeling energetic or, and that way you're just building those guardrails against stress and the guardrails against burnout. And those little things really make a difference. And that's what I had to remember when I was, covering the pandemic, just to maintain those little guardrails so I didn't fall back into burnout again.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our fabulous chat. I could listen to you talk all day, honestly.
Sure.
But are there any big or small changes that you want to still make in your life, Sophie?
Oh, look, I think that if you ever get to the point where you think you've got it all worked out, I think you're probably kidding yourself. So I'm always constantly sort of, iterating what I do and thinking about whether, how I'm running my life at the moment, whether it's really serving me in terms of serving my well-being and serving my relationships. And the biggest thing that I've been prioritizing this year is connection. So really carving out time to spend time with people that I enjoy their company. And so going for coffees with people and having lunches with people, and that's been fantastic, So I think probably really making sure that that's something that I continue to do, because all the research shows that the biggest predictor of our physical and emotional well-being is the quality of our relationships. So, that it's more important than anything else is making sure we have those good quality relationships that we can fall back on and we feel supported. And so making sure that I just continue that focus on connection, I think that's been my goal for this year, and I think it's going to continue. And I just, I think the day you give up learning and wanting to slightly iterate to a newer, better, different version, I think we've got to always just be thinking about how we can add value to our lives and enjoy it. That's the main thing. You want to be having a good time. And I'm studying positive psychology this year, and it's all about flourishing, and it's all about, getting out of that feeling of languishing. And languishing is just when you feel a bit blah, like you just, nothing's, you're not necessarily in this further down the spectrum of depression and anxiety, but it's moving up the spectrum of just wanting to feel really good. And it's not happyology. It's not about being happy all the time, but it's about, what does the science and the research show will actually get you to feeling like you're making the most of your life. And so I'm loving being, embedded into that world as well, because it just really reinforces that your mindset and what you focus on is the lens that you see the world through. And so if you choose to see it, through the lens of what's going well and, talking to amazing people like you two, then that's the world you see. Whereas if you focus on the negative lens, then that's the world you see as well. And so constantly thinking about what are the influences, what are the podcasts you're listening to, what are you reading, what are you watching, who are you spending time with, all those things influence your mindset, and then putting in those good habits as well, like movement and things like that. And that's what helps us feel like we really are flourishing.
Yeah.
Such a good answer. I've written so many notes. How am I going to work them out?
Pulling away. Oh, you've got your sabbatical.
That's right. Yes.
Take up all of these things.
I'm going to do them all. Sophie, last question. Our podcast is called The Change, in reference to this midlife experience of all women, whether that's peri or menopause. And we'd love to know, what is your experience or feeling towards this change?
So I feel like it can be a challenging period for women, but it can also be very empowering as well. I think one of the most important things that I've found during this midlife period is that things, and health issues that might have been a problem in the past can often come back in menopause and perimenopause, and making sure you feel really well supported with the good health professionals around you so that you can investigate all your options, including HRT and things like that, if that's appropriate for you, and just making sure you've got that really good support team around you, because it can be a very challenging period, but it can also be that if you can get that health support and feel as good as possible, then it can actually be one of the best times of your life, I think, because you do have the time. You've got you're not necessarily running after little kids and having to look after, little kids and do all that sort of stuff. And so I think it can be, and I think it's also a time of life when, for me anyway, you really look to find people who are going through the same thing that you are going through, and they're there, and like you, both of you and your audience. So I think really reaching out and leaning into those communities of people who are going through the same thing, I think that really helps get through these periods like this, when you realize that, everyone's going through the same sort of thing, and everyone's sort of almost like reinventing yourself at this time of your life. It is a massive time of change, but it can be, change. One of the things I talk about is embracing change and recognizing the benefits rather than just what we might be losing, but focusing on what you're gaining. And again, the way we're designed is for safety and security, and to not like change. But
that's me.
And that's just the way humans are built. We're designed we want to know what's safe and secure, and we like routines. We like to know what's going to happen. But change and being able to embrace change can really open up possibilities for your well-being and your life that you would never have imagined. And if you're open to that, and if you think about, okay, what has been happening in the past was good, but if you can embrace the concept of change, and I think about some of the things that I've been able to do since I left my other job that I would never have been able to do if I'd stayed there. I would never have had those chances. But you just have to be able to lean in and back yourself and go, you know what? And then that's where you need your midlife women around you to go, I support you, I've got your back. And you're not doing this alone. You're in this with a community of other people who are going through the same thing and who want you to succeed. And
have been through it and they're on the other side and can say, you know what, it can be a little bit scary, it can be a little bit challenging, but you'll get through and you'll survive it and you'll thrive, and or you won't, and you'll start again and you'll do something different, and you'll do, you know, like maybe this isn't the right thing, but that's okay too, you know. But we all have to sometimes make those choices in life, and sometimes they're the right choice and they work out, and sometimes we go, oh, that was a bit of a misstep, but that's okay. And I learned from that. And I remember hearing a while ago, I was on a podcast and they were talking about WD-40 of all things. And that's the name WD-40. That's something that we're very familiar with. It's that thing you spray on stuff to make it work, move, or squeaking and things. But the actual brand name WD-40 came about because they'd failed 39 times till they got to the one that worked. And they went, oh, well, this is the 40th attempt. And they worked out that and that's the brand name that we all know. So actually that represents how many times they'd made missteps, or, you know, tried again and tried again and tried again until they got to the perfect product.
And I think for anyone who looks at someone successful, what they don't see is all those failures and missteps on the way that got them to where they are. No one is an overnight success. People, you know, everyone puts in the hard yards and learns from the mistakes and learns from the failures and learns from the deviations. But, you know, and that's a great story, Cathy, you know, that it can often take multiple times until you get to where you want to go, but it's sticking with it. That's what gets you where you want to go, no matter where that destination is.
Oh, Cathy, Sophie was just amazing. I really could. I know we say it every time, but she has such a wealth of knowledge around mental health. I could talk to her all day.
I really could. Yeah. And I have been following Sophie for the longest time, and she every day when I see her little stories or her Instagram posts pop up, they just spark a little bit of joy in me. And joy isn't something that I find every day, but seeing Sophie's things pop up, they remind me that I don't have to have it all together. They remind me that I don't have to be perfect. I can sit and rest. Rest is important. Just all bite-sized chunks of information that are really easily digestible and also easily incorporated into my life.
So, oh my goodness. Yes. She is exactly the good side of social media. Do you know what I mean? When we spoke about the trolling and the bad side of it that came through, particularly after the pandemic and the, you know, very much polarizing opinions, but her content is where it's the good part, right? That's what we love about social media. And some of her tips there, I wrote down, like, look at my notes, they're all over the place. I've got like scribbling, highlighting. And one of the things that she said, obviously stuff about rituals and daily actions. I think that's such an important thing for us all to take away. But the thing that I highlighted the most was this urgency fallacy, that I'm so guilty of that. Like, someone messages me and I almost get that kind of like feeling of, oh my God, I have to reply to it now. And sometimes you do, if it's your child or if it's your husband saying, you know, can you open the front door or you've locked me out or something. But most of the time you actually don't. And I'm in this false sense of everything is urgent, and it's not. And I think working in the media is, as she says, and as we have both experienced, makes that worse. But yeah, that particularly stood out to me, and I thought, yep, that me.
Yeah, and you're so right. That urgency sensation that I have to do it all, and I have to do it all now, because if I don't do it all now, I'll miss the opportunity. Something I have learned over all the years, whether it be through my road to recovery or ongoing recovery and where I am now, if it's meant for me, it will come again. If I miss that opportunity, I'm going to feel bummed that I missed the opportunity or that I didn't take the opportunity. But if it's meant for me, it will come to me. That's really hard to sit with at times because I have a tendency to chase the shiny object, to chase the new thing, to want the best or to whatever it is. But I also know that chasing those things and that urgency, for me personally, it absolutely is not great for my mental health and it can send me into a bit of a spiral. So really knowing that I need to sit with things, and if they pass, they pass.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're absolutely right. And it's something that we in particular should pay attention to. And I'm sure many other people relate to that. We're all such busy, our brains are so busy, and we can all just take a little step back. And she called it like the big rock theory or something, didn't she? Where you just go, nah, what's in front of me? What will make the most, will give me the most reward impact right now, make the most impact. You're right. Yeah. So that was a really, really great chat. And I hope we get to talk to her again one day.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.